In this video, I'd like to talk about an area of work which I'm developing, which I'm provisionally calling intimacy coaching. I think it's the missing piece in the therapeutic world dealing with sexual healing. But to talk about it, I need to set a historical context. So if 100 years ago you had a sexual need or desire or thing that needed to be healed or attended to or whatever, you broadly had two choices. You could consult a doctor if you thought that the cause of your distress or what was missing was physical, or a psychotherapist of some sort if you thought it was to do with your history, with your functioning with maybe defective ideas you had, shame, trauma, whatever. And conversely, if you had a sexual need where you wanted to clear something, then you could buy that something from a sex worker. So there's a sort of traditional dichotomy that you buy professional expertise or you buy, in effect, someone's body in order to do something that you desire. And that dichotomy, primitive as it sounds, has carried itself forward to the present day. So although there are now many other people operating in the field of sexuality, so sexological body workers like myself, sexual surrogates, sex therapists, somatic sex therapists, again like myself, sex coaches, and so on. The tendency has been to stick to these two poles. And what sexological body workers, for example, have endeavoured to do is kind of adhere themselves to that pole which is characterised by medical expertise and psychological expertise. So sexological body workers, for instance, will have a rule about touch is just one way. It takes place in a very structured setting. It's professional. There's a structure in place of supervision, ethical guidelines to be followed, systems of complaints, and so on. So sexological body workers and other people in this area are doing their best to appear like doctors or like psychotherapists. They're professional people. And so that model of professionalism is applied to people like myself. And that model of professionalism implies a number of things. It implies expertise, it implies a clear ethical set of standards, and it applies a particular quality of relating, which is no doubt warm, which is responsive, but which has a certain distance to it. It's professional. And plainly, a purpose of that is to distinguish people like me quite sharply from sex workers. And that's particularly necessary, or has appeared to be necessary, because the bulk of people like myself are women, and the bulk of their clients are men. So you can see how a sharp distinction can come about. And so those qualities of professionalism, of touch being one way, and of the relationship being professional rather than relational, characterizes everybody working in this field. So even sexual surrogates, where touch obviously isn't one way, it's two ways, where there's sexual interaction with the client, the attitude is one of, as it were, professional distance. Now, while we can see how our modern perspective of people like myself has continued to cluster around these two poles, it creates a real problem. And that problem is that when you come to see people like myself, then there's kind of two ways to work. One of the ways is to just give you a particular physical experience. So you don't experience very much pleasure in your body, you're carrying around a lot of stress, you're suspicious and vigilant, and so you can't experience pleasure. So people like me can really help with that. And alternatively, you might have other things. You might be lacking in confidence, don't know what to say, find you're a doormat all the time, you can't assess your needs, you don't know what your needs are, all of that sort of thing. Then again, we can give you tools like the wheel of consent, like various sexuality maps, which I've talked about elsewhere. So we give you tools to navigate the world. But the problem with that is that as far as the bodywork is concerned, it might be very helpful in allowing people to live differently in the world out there, but very often it's seen as being like a sort of pleasure island, that people have a deficiency in their life and they come and have a lovely session with people like me, and then they feel better and they can go out into the world again refreshed, but that world remains essentially the same. So it's difficult to make a jump from what you can experience in the session to how your world outside can be different. The application of different sorts of techniques, like learning the wheel of consent, for instance, may well, hopefully, help relationships generally. So I think that is different. The problem, I think, and it's a problem that's hiding in plain sight, is that our sexuality has two aspects to it. It firstly has an experiential aspect, what I feel and what I can feel, and we can obviously help you feel a lot more, but it is a relational aspect. What am I feeling in this connective field with another person? And that relational aspect, I think, in the classification that we have at the moment, is deficient. And in a gradually developing an experimental way, very often working with colleagues rather than working with clients, I'm uncovering a way to address this deficiency. So what I would often find, for instance, if I'm having a bodywork session with a client, is that it might be a very good idea to dance with the client. It might be a very good idea to invite the client rather than simply lie down on my massage table as you would on a visit to the doctor's, to maybe start the session sitting on my table or standing up, or anyway being free to move as the urge takes you. And it might be a very good idea to allow two-way touch. You can see how a rule is there for one-way touch, but if the client is also free to engage in touch as well, that's often very helpful within certain boundaries. So it's important for me that I do not engage with a client in a directly sexual way, because obviously enough, it has the possibility of delusion on my part, as happens with many male practitioners. But what I can give, which is distinct, I think, is an emotional warmth to the client. So rather than simply a professional warmth, there's an emotional connection. And that emotional connection is for the benefit of the client. So that emotional warmth as distinct from professionalism, and that interaction that is possible within that emotional warmth, I would say, is what I'm calling intimacy coaching. And to me, it makes several things more possible. The first is that rather than the experience being a sort of pleasure island that you go to and then go back to the world as usual, we're kind of modeling how you would like interactions in that world to be. And because the modeling is much closer to your actual interactions with people in the world outside, I think it's got a much better chance of happening, of change happening. But the second thing is that I think that what we can experience, and I think this particularly applies to women that I've worked with, but what we can experience, the vividness of our experience, has a connective quality to it. In other words, if we feel connected, we can experience much more. And that experience isn't just what we might be experiencing in sensory terms, but it's the widest range that we have. So we're experiencing more emotionally, we're experiencing more imaginally, we're experiencing more energetically, and we're experiencing more spiritually. So I intend to post more about this developing area of my work. But if this is of any interest, if this resonates with you, then I'd invite you to have a conversation with me.